In the middle of the 14th century, a darkness crept across the world, silent, invisible, unstoppable. It began with rumors whispered along trade routes, stories of entire towns emptied overnight, caravans found abandoned in the dust, and strange fevers that left bodies twisted and blackened. Most dismissed these tales as exaggeration born from distant lands. But soon, the truth arrived with terrifying clarity. What was coming was not a war, not a famine, not a punishment from kings or armies. It was something far smaller, microscopic, ancient, and merciless. And it would become one of the deadliest catastrophes in human history. The plague that would later be known as the Black Death was already on the move. Far from the bustling markets of Europe, in the vast grasslands and rugged peaks of Central Asia, the first sparks of the catastrophe ignited. Here, in burrows beneath the earth, a tiny bacterium, Yersinia pestis, lived within fleas that fed on wild rodents. For centuries, it remained mostly unnoticed, contained by nature's balance. But changes in climate, shifting animal migration, and expanding trade routes pushed infected rodents closer to human settlements. Merchants along the Silk Road unknowingly became the carriers of a silent doom. Packed into caravans, nestled inside grain sacks, riding aboard ships, the fleas traveled effortlessly. With every mile, the plague crept closer to civilization, hitching a ride toward unsuspecting cities that had no idea of the dark tide approaching their shores. By 1346, the plague reached the Crimean port city of Kaffa, a crucial link between East and West. Here, a Genoese trading colony found itself trapped under siege by the Mongol army. But as the Mongols prepared to crush the defenders, a new horror struck their own camp, soldiers collapsing with fever, their bodies covered in dark swellings, dying by the hundreds. Panic spread through the ranks. What happened next remains one of history's most chilling accounts. Desperate to break the siege, Mongol commanders ordered the corpses of their plague-ridden dead to be hurled over the walls using catapults. Whether this act was intentional biological warfare or merely legend, its consequences were tragically real. Terrified Genoese sailors fled aboard their ships, carrying with them not just fear, but the very seeds of the plague itself. And with the winds at their backs, they sailed straight toward Europe. When the Genoese ships reached the Sicilian port of Messina in October 1347, the horror became undeniable. Dockworkers watched in dread as the vessels drifted in, some crew already dead, others barely clinging to life. Those who boarded quickly recoiled, the sailors were covered in blackened swellings, bleeding from the mouth, delirious with fever. Within days, Messina erupted in panic. The city tried to drive the ships back to sea, but it was too late. The plague had come ashore, carried not only by men but by rats and fleas hidden in their cargo. And from that moment, Europe's nightmare began. From Sicily, the disease spread with terrifying speed. Ships leaving the island carried the infection to Genoa, Venice, and Pisa. Trade routes that once brought wealth now became pathways of death. Travelers moving by land unknowingly transported the plague deeper into the continent. Within weeks, cases appeared across Italy. People collapsed in marketplaces, churches, and on the steps of their own homes. Physicians tried to soothe the sick with herbal mixtures, bloodletting, or charms, but nothing slowed the advance. Families locked themselves inside, hoping wooden doors could keep death out. But the rats scurried through the walls, and the fleas continued their silent hunt. By early 1348, the plague marched northward, reaching France. Paris, the shining intellectual heart of Europe, was gripped with terror. Chroniclers described the city as a vast cemetery. Bells rang without pause as funeral processions crossed the overflowing bridges of the Seine. Streets once crowded with scholars and merchants emptied. Rumors claimed the air itself had turned toxic, corrupted by a celestial alignment or foul mists rising from the earth. People clutched flowers to their noses, burned herbs, or fled toward the countryside. But no matter where they ran, the plague always seemed to arrive first. In February 1348, the plague crossed the Pyrenees into Spain. Entire monasteries were found silent, their halls filled with the bodies of monks who refused to abandon their vows of care. Nobles fled to their estates, only to watch their servants and children fall sick. Chroniclers recorded scenes of unimaginable grief, mothers burying their sons, only to succumb days later, priests administering last rites to the dying before collapsing themselves. In Aragon, the death toll was so severe that harvests failed, villages emptied, and wolves roamed freely among farmsteads. It felt as though the natural world was reclaiming human lands. But one of the hardest-hit kingdoms was England. That summer, a ship from Normandy carried the plague across the Channel to the port of Melcombe. Within weeks, the disease spread inland, reaching London. The cramped, filthy city, where people lived packed together in wooden homes, became a perfect breeding ground. The wealthy fled, but the poor had nowhere to run. Night after night, carts rolled through the streets, filled with bodies collected from doorsteps and alleys. Mass graves swallowed thousands. Chroniclers wrote that the dead were thrown in without order, packed so tightly that layers of soil barely separated them. The symptoms were unlike anything Europe had seen. Victims first felt chills and weakness, followed by a fever that rose with shocking speed. Painful swellings, buboes, appeared under the arms, on the neck, or in the groin, sometimes as large as an apple. Some developed black blotches under the skin as internal bleeding spread. Others coughed blood as their lungs filled with fluid, signaling the deadly pneumonic strain. And the septicemic form, spreading through the bloodstream, killed so fast that some died within hours, collapsing in fields or on the road before they could even cry for help. Fear warped the human spirit. Some people shut themselves inside their homes, refusing even to help family members. Others turned to wild desperation. Flagellants marched from town to town, whipping themselves in public squares, believing their suffering might persuade God to show mercy. In many regions, minority communities, especially Jews, were falsely blamed for poisoning wells. Mobs, fueled by terror and superstition, destroyed entire neighborhoods. Innocent people were tortured, banished, or killed. The plague was not only destroying bodies, it was unraveling the fragile bonds holding medieval society together. Yet amid the chaos, courage flickered. Physicians, though powerless, continued to treat the sick. Priests stayed by the dying even when their own lives were at risk. Small groups of neighbors formed protective circles, caring for one another when others fled. Monks and nuns nursed the infected in monasteries that soon became tombs. These acts of compassion, lost in the overwhelming darkness, remind us that humanity persisted even when hope seemed impossible. By late 1348, the plague crossed into the German states and the Low Countries. Cities like Cologne, Hamburg, and Bruges witnessed devastation on a scale that defied comprehension. Trade halted, guilds collapsed, and entire professions disappeared. In some towns, half the population was gone within months. Chroniclers struggled to describe what they saw, some simply stopped writing altogether. They believed the world was ending. And in many ways, the medieval world, the social order, the economy, the relationship between rich and poor, was ending. Winter brought no relief. The plague did not respect seasons or borders. Snow fell over silent farmlands where no one remained to harvest grain. Roads were empty except for scavengers searching for abandoned supplies. In Poland and parts of Hungary, reports claim the plague struck less severely, though whether by luck, geography, or early quarantine measures remains debated. But even these spared regions felt the shock waves. Trade collapsed, prices surged, and refugees arrived with stories that chilled the heart. Across Europe, the death toll soared. Modern estimates suggest that between 1347 and 1351, the Black Death claimed the lives of 50 to 80 million people, nearly half the continent's population. Entire generations vanished. Orphaned children wandered the roads alone. Villages disappeared from maps. Churches struggled to bury the dead quickly enough, and in some regions, bodies were burned in great pyres to slow the spread. Chroniclers wrote that people died faster than they could be counted. It was a time when even the strongest faith wavered. The plague spared no class. Kings and nobles succumbed alongside peasants and beggars. In Norway, a ship arrived filled only with corpses, drifting silently until it crashed onto shore. In Florence, the poet Giovanni Boccaccio wrote of families abandoning one another in desperation. In Ireland, monasteries fell quiet, their libraries left untouched for decades. In Cairo, the plague killed thousands each day, turning the great city into a place of mourning. The Black Death was not a European disaster, it was a global one. And yet, despite the horror, the plague eventually slowed. By 1351, the first great wave had burned through the dense urban centers that fueled its spread. Survivors emerged cautiously from their homes, stepping into a silent world transformed beyond recognition. Overgrown fields, collapsed barns, and abandoned homes stood as monuments to the lives lost. The air itself felt changed, as if carrying the memory of suffering. But it was not only the landscape that was altered, society itself had shifted. With so many dead, labor became scarce. Peasants who had once been tied to the land now found themselves in high demand. Landowners offered better wages, shorter hours, and improved living conditions to attract workers. The rigid structures of feudalism began to crack. Ordinary people saw opportunities that had been impossible just years before. Though born from tragedy, a new economic reality took shape, one that slowly pushed Europe toward modernization. Social mobility, wage labor, and the decline of serfdom all found their roots in the aftermath of the Black Death. Faith also changed. Some survivors believed they had been spared by divine will, others questioned the Church's authority after witnessing its inability to stop the suffering. This crisis of faith planted seeds of skepticism that would later shape movements like the Reformation. Communities rebuilt their religious practices, emphasizing personal spirituality and local traditions. Art and literature shifted, exploring themes of mortality, fragility, and the fleeting nature of life. The plague reshaped not just economies, but the human spirit. Medicine, too, was forced to evolve. The medieval understanding of disease, rooted in superstition and theory, had proven tragically ineffective. In the decades that followed, scholars began studying anatomy more seriously, questioning long-held beliefs. Universities expanded medical training. Public health measures, like quarantines and sanitary boards, emerged across Europe. Though the germ theory of disease would not be discovered for centuries, the Black Death marked a turning point, a painful awakening to the need for scientific inquiry. But the plague was not finished. It returned again and again for centuries. Outbreaks in 1361, 1369, and later years haunted Europe, each wave a grim echo of the first. Some were smaller, others devastating. The second pandemic persisted into the 18th century, reshaping populations and cultures long after the original catastrophe. The memory of the 1347 to 1351 outbreak lingered like a scar, influencing everything from urban planning to burial customs. Humanity learned to live with the shadow of the plague. And yet, from this darkness emerged resilience. Survivors rebuilt what had been shattered. They planted crops in fields long abandoned. They reopened markets, tended animals, repaired homes, and rekindled the fragile threads of daily life. Communities formed new bonds, born from shared trauma. Children who grew up in the aftermath inherited a changed world, one shaped not only by loss but by newfound strength. The plague had taken so much, but it had not taken humanity's will to endure. The Black Death stands today as one of history's greatest turning points. It reshaped nations, economies, and beliefs. It showed the fragility of life, and the power of human adaptation. From the ashes of unimaginable devastation rose new ideas, new systems, and new ways of understanding the world. It revealed both the light and the darkness within us, fear, cruelty, compassion, bravery. And it reminded humanity that even the smallest organism can change the course of civilization. Modern science has uncovered the secrets medieval Europeans could not. We know the plague was caused by a bacterium carried by fleas, spread by rats, and accelerated by trade. We know how it moves, how it kills, and how to treat it. But knowledge does not erase the legacy left behind. The stories recorded in crumbling manuscripts, the abandoned villages, the mass graves unearthed by archaeologists, all echo the same truth: history is fragile, shaped not just by kings and conquerors, but by forces invisible to the naked eye. Today, the plague still exists, though no longer the menace it once was. Antibiotics can treat it, and outbreaks are rare. But its memory endures, in folklore, in literature, and in the cultural DNA of nations. The Black Death reminds us of the delicate relationship between humanity and nature, and of how swiftly life can change. It urges us to remain vigilant, to learn from the past, and to hold compassion close, even when fear tempts us to turn inward. As we look back on the years 1347 to 1351, we see more than tragedy. We see resilience. We see transformation. We see a world brought to its knees, only to rise again, forever changed. The Black Death was a storm that reshaped humanity, its beliefs, its systems, its destiny. And though centuries have passed, its lessons still echo through time. For history is not only written by swords or empires, but by the smallest forces, capable of touching every life on earth. The plague was one such force. And its shadow continues to remind us of our vulnerability, yet also of our enduring strength.